Hey everyone, welcome to Build Your SaaS. This is the behind the scenes story of building a web app in 2018. I'm John Buda, software engineer.
And I'm Justin Jackson, and I'm standing in a 100-year-old bank vault.
Did you rob it? How'd you get in?
This is how desperate I was to find a recording spot. I robbed a bank and barricaded myself in here.
Well, it sounds good. Is it all the money? All the money is insulating the sound?
That's right. Yeah, that's true. That's another good way to insulate that people don't think about. Real dollar bills.
Not very economical.
That's how we roll here.
Yeah.
Follow along as we build transistor.fm. That's why we're here. This bank vault is in my co-working place, and this was once the post office. And so Vernon is a very unusual Canadian town in that most Canadian cities have nothing old, like no old buildings. Like if you have anything past, the 1900s, well, there are no buildings past 1900. But in Vernon, we have my kid's school is built in 1867. No, not 1867. Is that right? Or 1896. I can't remember which one. But we have all these buildings that are built in the late 1800s. And I think this post office is, I'll have to double check. I know it's at least 100 years old. So
yeah, there was a restaurant in Chicago that was actually built in an old bank, and you could eat in the bank vault.
Oh, no way.
But it was a really cool place, kind of like underground a little bit, but they closed. So
there is actually, you're in Austin right now, right?
Right.
And there is a really cool restaurant there that I ate at when I was speaking at a conference. They had a speaker's dinner. It's an underground, like, gangster's cave. I'll try to find photos. It is crazy. Like, it's
nice.
It's unlike any place I've been in. It's all rock. It was, like, blasted out of the rock. I'll put a photo in the show notes as well, which you can find at saas.transistor.fm. Before we go too far, John, why don't we give some Patreon shout-outs? I'll do the first one, and you do the rest. We have a brand new Patreon named, apologies if I don't get the pronunciation correct, Samori Augusto, and quite generous, actually. Thank you for being a new sponsor. And I think this time we'll mention the app that he's building, the bicrowd.com. So thank you to Samori. Who else do we have?
We have Mike Walker. We have Brad from Canada. We have Darby Frey from Chicago. Kevin Markham, Adam Duvander, and Dave Junta. Also from Chicago.
Do you see that little note I left there now?
Yeah. He actually sent me a note on Slack, and he was like, "It's hilarious to hear Justin try to pronounce my name."
I think it's the best comedy are the recurring bits, and in some ways, I don't want to lose that bit. So, and the nice thing for Dave is he gets so much airtime. Like we talk about Junta like every single time. It's a little stop on our podcast train.
We'll give you the opportunity to say his name in a couple months and see if you can remember how.
Yeah, I mean, you practice enough things. So last week, John, we talked about this interview I did with Tyler Tringus of Earnest Capital. And then we played an abridged version for all the listeners. And now, this week, I thought we would talk about it. Did you get a chance to listen to it?
I did. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It actually, once I was finished listening to it, I think it sort of set in that type of funding model is kind of exactly what I would be looking for. If I know we've talked about it before.
Yeah,
it's like, here's what I would want. And it seems to be like what Earnest is going for. Obviously, they're not, they haven't launched yet. But
yeah. And Tyler said, he actually messaged me and said he'd be happy to do a follow-up interview. And yeah, they're still building it. He was very clear to say he didn't expect this thing to blow up the way it did. But I think it's interesting for us to look at it, especially because there are a number of these now. We have Tiny Seed Fund from Rob Walling. We have Indie.vc. There's there's all of these new funding vehicles coming online. They're interesting from a variety of perspectives. One, I think they're challenging this old archetype that bootstrapping is good and funding is bad, or depending on which side of the war you're on, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think Tyler touched on this a little bit in that, like, he doesn't see anything wrong with VC. It's just one other option, and maybe you'll get there eventually, depending on how you're funded initially or not funded. But yeah, it's just sort of a new approach to a model that doesn't work for everyone.
And in some ways, it's refreshing because the old kind of religion, which was, maybe spearheaded by DHH and Jason Fried of Basecamp, was, venture capital is evil. And why don't take it? It's not worth it. You sell your soul, you sell your company. It sets up all these unrealistic expectations. And they've been quite strong. They've been quite strong on that, right? Like you can read the blog posts, and maybe for good reason. There's also a lot of blog posts that have come out lately, for example, from Buffer and Wistia, who have said, this is the downside to raising money, and they're buying out their investors now. I think Buffer, what did Buffer? I'll put this in the show notes as well. Yeah, they are going private, basically buying out their investors, going private, using debt financing for this, and there's definitely and they talk about the downsides, right? As soon as you take venture capital, you are setting yourself up to go. You have to grow. You have to grow.
You have to grow.
Not just 2x, but 50x. Have you ever worked for a venture funded startup?
I haven't. No, I've somehow avoided that. I don't know how.
I've worked for a startup that was venture funded, and it is a lot of pressure because it's not enough to be profitable. It's not enough to be, basically all you care about is growth, because you want to grow so big that you are, attractive to be acquired or go public, I guess.
Right. It's just such a bizarre model to me. I mean, you have so much pressure to grow and be big, and the profits don't matter. You're basically only trying to be sold or go public to raise money to then grow bigger. To then maybe be profitable at some point, or then be bought.
Yes.
After you're public. It's just, I don't know. It's so much different than just trying to build like a stable long-term business.
Yes, totally. I finally found this blog post from Buffer. It really is worth reading. I'll put it in the show notes here. I'll just call it Buffer buying out investors. But they're using half the cash they have in the bank, plus, I'm guessing, debt financing. So $3.3 million to buy out their investors. It just the point is, it sets you on this train, and, that's been the traditional kind of thinking. So then all of a sudden, Indie VC comes out with this essay, makes a big splash on Hacker News. This is a couple years ago. And Indie VC says, listen, we are changing the tone here. We don't want to invest in growth. We want to invest in companies that are going to be profitable. This is looked at like a innovative technology, and it kind of blows people's minds. Some people are, they're like, whatever. Other folks are really interested in it. And they were kind of the first ones that I heard that were doing this. And then, more recently we have Rob Walling announcing the Tiny Seed Fund, and now most recently Earnest. And this time, when these announcements comes out, the old guard of bootstrapping has changed its tone. So David Hannemeyer Hansen in a tweet says, Earnest Capital is an interesting alternative to VC funding for entrepreneurs who can't bootstrap but don't want time bomb funding either.
Yeah.
And so it's almost it's quelled a little bit of the ideology, these entrenched ideas that you either bootstrap, and that is maybe more pure than taking funding, or or
right. It's just one approach is right, one approach is wrong.
Yeah. And Rob Walling also, quite famously wrote a book called what is it? Start Small, Stay Small, and he was an ardent bootstrapper, but then he was acquired. His company Drip was acquired by Lead Pages, and I mean, there's probably other things too. He started investing in small little companies, and he started espousing this idea of fund strapping. So you take these principles that have developed around bootstrapping. So having very lean operations, trying to get to profit as quickly as you can, being profitable from day one if you can, focusing on on cash and revenue, focusing on building a sustainable business. All of these ideas, but then also saying, but let's give folks some runway. And I think Tyler in that interview put it really well. He said, there's some people that, are in their 20s and can move to Thailand and live on $25 a day. But, in our case, we can't do that. I mean, some days I dream about it.
Sounds great. Yeah, right. But on the other hand, like there's, the fund strapping you're talking about, like you're still, I don't know, it makes it sound like you're just going to get this chunk of money with zero strings attached. There's always some trade-off.
That's right. Yeah. And
earnest seems like I said, seems like the closest to what I would envision as like a good trade-off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, that's what I wanted to talk about with you today is, could we foresee ourselves using something like that, and what would be the pros and the cons?
Right.
So maybe, why don't we just start with you? Like you've talked a little bit. You've said, okay, this is probably the closest thing, but what are some of the cons? Like, what would you think are some of the disadvantages to, you and I taking that kind of money?
Right. I mean, it seems like the only big disadvantage is like, I mean, we obviously wouldn't take it immediately if we didn't think we needed it, but like, so Ernest thinks you're a good fit. We go with something like that.
Mm-hmm.
We get the money. We would both have to like do this full time, obviously. Mm-hmm. Would we later on feel like we shouldn't have taken it? Maybe we didn't need the money to get to where we got to,
mm-hmm.
and then you're sort of stuck in this, you got to pay it back to a certain return rate, right? Which might take, I mean, for a business our size, that might take like a decade of just like slowly paying back this loan, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you think about it as a loan, that's a really high interest loan.
Yeah. Well, actually, is it? That's when
sort of. Well,
so, I mean, let's say commercial money. Well, the problem is we can't get commercial money, so the interest rate we'd be paying is probably, what is Stripe's? Actually, Stripe has an interesting one. This was just on Indie Hackers. Let me go in and look at that. But there's, someone had just said they got one of these Stripe loans, and Stripe gave us a $20,000 advance. The terms are $20,000 advance, 10% fee, or $2,000, and Stripe takes 5% of your daily revenue until the loan is paid back with the fee. This fellow Travis R is saying, who I think I know. He's saying, comparable bank loans for a $20,000 unsecured line would have been anywhere from 7% to 29%. He's saying this seems like a good fit for us. They took it even though they don't really need it. They just want to, they just wanted to have the cash. This person here, in the comments, folks are saying, why'd you take the money? That's quite high. Now the other thing is we're talking about scale too, right? You might be able to get a bank loan or a line of credit for $10,000 or $20,000, but if we're talking about $200,000, what is that compounded over? Let's put the amortization as 5 years, and we would pay it monthly. Let's see what this says. That would be a $4,249 monthly payment. So that's 60 months. 4249. So we would pay roughly $55,000 interest on that,
which is significantly less.
Significantly less, yeah. So we've done the math now. Although all of this changes, of course, if we go to 10 years. Over 10 10 years, it would, let's see, what would that be? 10 years. Over 10 years, it would be $317,000. So you're paying $117,000 in interest.
Right. I mean, it's different. But then on the other hand, like if you don't pay your bank loan back, you're screwed.
You lose your house.
And I think with this, it sounds like they would take the loss. Obviously, they're going to want to invest in companies that they feel confident in reaching profitability like that. But like, if you don't, I think it's just a risk for them, right? It's not, they're not going to like sue you, or like, you're not going to have to go into bankruptcy.
Yeah. And by the way, I don't know if we've mentioned this actually, but the terms that Earnest has right now are, so you take, let's say we took 100,000, they would want back a 3 to 5x return. So anywhere between 300,000 and 500,000. And the way that they get that return is interesting. They don't take any company stock. They don't take any equity,
right?
Which is quite interesting, because traditional investors, they want a big portion of your company. They want a seat on the board. Earnest just wants a portion of founder earnings up to 3 to 5x. And the folks I've talked to have said, Earnest is interesting because that's quite a lot of risk on their side. Yeah, here's one comment I got by email. I'll be interested to see if these new, small, profitable business investing models work. It always seems to me that investing in tech startups was so risky, they had to get at least a 10x return out of 10% of their investments just to break even. I listened to the abridged version of your podcast with Tyler Tringas, but upon reflection, I'm not sure I understand how they're attempting to reduce their own risk, allowing them to succeed with only 4 to 5x return.
Yeah, I mean, they must have to be really diligent in the kinds of companies they invest in, I guess.
Yeah.
But I would assume other venture capital firms are as well.
Yeah, I mean,
so it's tough.
Yeah, I think it's a new theory. The new theory is they will lose less. So when you're, it's kind of like Babe Ruth. When Babe Ruth was swinging, he was always swinging for the fences. And I think his batting average wasn't that good. Now I'm all the baseball people. He swung for the fences, and that's what venture capitalists want.
Right. So those are the cons. You are paying back. It's a decent chunk of money. Like if you think about it, it's being taken out of the founder's salaries or the
dividends
or distributions over time. That adds up.
Yeah.
$400,000 in lost, income is a lot.
Yeah.
But at the end of that, you're obviously in a place where, assuming you pay all that back, you're obviously running a successful company at that point.
Yeah.
And then once it's paid off, you are in a great spot.
Yeah.
I think in the case of Earnest, it seems like the pros kind of outweigh the cons. It's quite a bit.
Yeah.
It seems like a very hands-off approach. And I think this goes back to what I was talking about when I, had this idea for a type of investment that I would be comfortable with, which is like, you have someone investing money in you and they they have obviously vetted you, and they trust you to kind of continue on as you are.
Mm-hmm.
They have a feeling that you can be a successful company, and it's very hands off. They're not making decisions for you or telling you which way to go.
Mm-hmm.
They don't put someone on the board. They might have like a community for you to talk with other founders, but they're not pushing you in one direction or the other.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is interesting. It's something I want to keep chewing on. The challenge with all of this stuff, and I think I mentioned this in the interview, is what's difficult about the dogma on both sides is that it's very difficult to take one business who are at a crossroads like we are and say that one move was better than the other, because we can't A/B test reality. We can't say, okay, let's take Ernest's money and let's try out that path. And if that doesn't work, we'll get in our time machine, we'll come back to this point, and then we'll take, $2 million in venture capital. And if that doesn't work, we'll come back to this point, and then we'll just bootstrap it the way we were going to before. We can't do that. And all of the survivor bias in all of the publicly available examples doesn't really help us, because, I don't know, we could say, okay, ConvertKit, it's wildly successful, but maybe it would be even better if they had taken money. Or, someone who failed, maybe they wouldn't have failed if they had, chosen a different path.
Yeah.
And so it's so difficult, because the number one risk with all of this stuff is burning out.
Right. Can you stay in it long enough?
Can you stay in it long enough? Can you grow at the right time? I think I told this story before, but I was in the ESP industry, the email service provider industry, quite early. And I remember at the time, we were looking at MailChimp, and we were looking at, MailChimp primarily, and just thinking, man, they are so behind. Like we didn't even consider them, they were a competitor, but we just thought they're not as formidable as Campaign Monitor at the time.
Right.
And it's just amazing how things change. At the time we had Campaign Monitor, which was bootstrapped. We had Constant Contact, which had taken money and gone public. And we had MailChimp, which was bootstrapped. And we were just thinking, that the playing field was still wide open.
Yeah, and today, when you think of that industry, who do you think of first?
Yeah, it's MailChimp. So obviously, it wasn't just one decision that led them there. I think that's important. There's often people think it's just one decision that's going to make or break the company. This decision isn't the one thing that's going to make or break us. There's other things too, but you also think there were some certain things MailChimp did that really helped them leap forward, and maybe in retrospect, some of those competitors would have been like, maybe we should have done that. It's tricky, right? Because we want to make the right decision. We want to be able to go to the distance, but how do we make that decision?
Right.
I think another interesting point, I've put this in the show notes as well. Indie VC just tweeted this, and John, I sent this to you as well. He says, interesting tidbit from our LP meeting prep. So this is Indie VC. They're getting ready to say,
what is LP? What does that mean?
Limited partner. So I think that means these are the folks that have invested in the fund. I think that's what it means. Feel free to correct me, everybody. Anyway, interesting tidbit from our LP meeting prep. Median rev growth per company post-investment. So after Indie VC invests, how much does revenue growth increase? Median revenue growth was 196%. So you take the baseline of all their investments and you compare revenue growth pre-investment and post-investment. The median rate of growth is 196%. The average revenue growth was 723%. So there's clearly some folks, this money was all they needed to unlock a bunch of growth. And growth growth isn't everything, but that's
right.
That's certainly, something.
Right. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that if we went the investment route and we were doing this full time, that our revenue would grow significantly.
Yeah.
Like I know that'll happen. It's just, is it enough? It's like it's tough to decide.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where are you at with it? How do you feel about it?
This is what makes it interesting when you have co-founders, is that we talk quite a bit, and on your side, you're thinking about things like health insurance. You're thinking about you've got a great job. You've got there's all these things on your side. On my side, I'm thinking, okay, well, I've got this little business that I'm running aside from Transistor, and if I can make that pay the bills, I could probably keep going. But I've also seen both of us frustrated by just like, if we could just invest more, this thing would really, I agree with you. Like, I feel like we could kick ass. Like, there's, if we're able to invest our whole selves in this, we could really unlock some great stuff. Yeah. So I think part of me is like, that would be wonderful to be able to do that. But even then, I say I'm sure we would unlock that growth, but you never really know. Like, it might just keep growing the same way it's always grown, even if we're working harder. I imagine that it would increase. Even like in terms of mind space, I think that's one thing we've been challenged with. It's really, our brains are just full of shit. Like, they really are. Like,
right. I think that would be the biggest win. I mean, it's just the focus, and it's really hard to get momentum.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's the biggest problem when you're not doing it full time.
Yeah.
It's like, you can maybe knock out some support requests here and there and like fix really small things, but these ongoing larger features that I personally keep saying are almost done and are going to be done soon.
Yeah.
Are still not done, because it's like, it basically requires like an entire day to focus on it, at least like 8 hours of focus time, which is really only possible on the weekends.
Yeah. And even having the mind space to make decisions like, how can we improve our pricing? How can we improve our user experience? How can we improve our onboarding? And you have these things that you notice as a product person. So like, one thing I've noticed is our help system is still not very discoverable inside of the app. And it's frustrating because, people will contact us and I have to go and find these articles and show them to them. But if there was a way of exposing these things, all these articles we've written already, people's experience would be way better. But just to tackle that problem, to think about it and go, okay, how can we best deliver this one thing? It requires mind share. It requires focus. It requires time to think. My friend Tan says that the role of a founder is mostly thinking. Like, that's most of your job, especially once you have people working for you. Most of your job is just thinking. And Steve Jobs famously took a lot of walks where he was just thinking. And I can see that because so much of this is just get myself in a space where I can really think about something and really go deep.
Yeah, I think that's ultimately what that freedom would afford. The freedom, right? The money would afford the freedom to really give it the time the thinking time that it requires.
Yeah. The challenge for companies, no matter what stage you're at, is eventually you need to make decisions and move on. And so what's great about being opinionated, like the folks at Basecamp were, is it just helps you set your course. It helps you say, what are we about? We're about not taking investment. Okay, let's go. And then they just worked for 2 to 3 years on Basecamp on the side. David Hannemeyer Hansen, actually, he tweeted out. So I wrote this article about startup costs that got quite a bit of traction, and he tweeted it. He shared it, and then people were responding saying, what did you mean by that or whatever? And the one thing they asked him is, how much were you paying yourselves in those early days? Let me see if I can find this. And he said $40,000 to $50,000 a person. So, even that is interesting, right? Like that.
Right.
So what did he say? He said, reducing costs means reducing risk and adding options. Growing business is a maybe. Lowering costs is a definite. We didn't go full-time with Basecamp before it could comfortably pay the meager 2005 salaries of 4 people. Could we have gambled? Sure, but I don't gamble. He's so strong. But, he's saying, well, back in 2005, we didn't go full-time with Basecamp until it could pay $40,000 to $50,000 per head. Well, one of the challenges we have, this was young DHH, no kids, young Jason Fried, no kids.
It's a much different situation.
And for us, it's like, well, it would have to be $100K per head for us.
Right.
Just to even put us in the ballpark. And so we're already kind of doubling that. Just different stage of life, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's different stage of life, different time, different decade, different time. There's a lot of things that are different now than I think when they were worried about that.
Yeah.
Certainly the cost of living is a little bit higher, especially in cities.
Yeah, and just stage of life is different. Oh, the only other thing I wanted to mention, actually, I can just blast through these. So what kinds of companies does Ernest want to invest in? These are some notes from the interview. Organic customer acquisition channels. I think we definitely have that, by the way. So if anything, this is a nice scorecard for us. So we get tons of signups from word of mouth, from search. I had someone the other day that said, yeah, I was just searching this term, found your site and signed up. Low levels of structural churn. So ready to stay customers for a long period of time. There's tons of evidence that people who pay for podcast hosting stick around for a long time. I was at a party, and a fellow said, he had a hockey podcast, and he hadn't updated in a while, but he was still paying Libsyn every month for the podcast, right? So these people, they create these shows, but they want them to live on. They don't want them to cease to exist, right? Founder is a good fit is the other check mark he wants. Product is launched and has revenue. That's also us. And it has to be a space that Tyler Tringus feels comfortable with. He's, as the general partner, he wants to have some sort of interest or understanding of the market.
Uh-huh.
And he's talked a lot about podcasting, and he's even given us kind of private feedback on our user experience and marketing. So we meet a lot of the requirements. And
right. And you haven't really talked to him necessarily directly about us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I haven't talked to him.
He also hasn't really opened this for business yet. So.
Yeah. I also got to ask him about Republic.co, which is something I've been interested in. Republic.co is a crowd equity funding option. Mm-hmm. And Radio Public, who's in our space, just raised, I think, 200,000 or 300,000 doing this.
Okay.
And I just didn't understand, like, what are the pros and cons. Tyler has a pretty good understanding of it, and he said it's a great option if you have an audience of fans that want to support your work. But in terms of the people who invest, their crowd equity doesn't have monetary value unless you raise a big round or go public. So my understanding is that folks who invest in these things, they either are fans or they want the perks that you're offering as a part of the, for a better word, Kickstarter, right?
Yeah.
So that was interesting to me because I didn't quite understand the equity portion. But he says basically it's like you're getting a promissory note or something that if this company ever raises money in the future or goes public, then that crowd equity converts to something that's actually valuable. But yeah, I think we'll leave it there. Folks, if you have kind of feedback or ideas, or if you can see into the future, if you have this time machine, please let us know.
You might have some other benefits if you already have a time machine.
Yeah, no, I want you to only use your time machine to go in the future and look at our future. Maybe we don't want that. Maybe this is actually the best part right here, is just two guys hustling on the side and talking every week and recording a podcast. This might be like we'll look back on this and go,
yeah,
wow, those were the days. Remember that? Remember when we were Justin was just recording in his closet?
Yep.
Those were the best days.
We might look back wistfully on those days.
It's true.
Say, well, we weren't making any money, but we had fun talking.
Yeah, but those were the days. Okay, so we got to wrap up. So we're still working on SSL.
Yeah.
Still working on Spotify
SSL.
Analytics. Those are both coming.
Yeah. Nothing really big. I mean, I rolled out a small update for iPhone X and XS.
Ooh.
In the web browser, if you look at your Transistor hosted websites, there's a little bit of CSS. Apple kind of provides these weird little hacky CSS overrides that sort of add padding for the notch, so it'll in landscape mode it'll still look good and be like full screen and bleed to the edges, but not like your content won't be cut off. So anyway, we had a customer, one of the co-hosts of Supercomputer, who sort of suggested it, and honestly, I didn't even know that CSS existed. So
nice.
Your sites will look better in landscape mode.
Cool.
That's the only real thing we've rolled out. Just a few updates to YouTube here and there. That's still sort of, that feature still feels somewhat beta to me. Like it's better, but it's for some reason some of these videos, like, they stall out when we encode it and they just sit there for hours. And I don't quite know why.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep working on it. That's not every week can be a nice big feature release anyway, even when you've got tons of people working for you. So,
right. I mean, it feels good. It feels good to knock out the small things, but it also feels like sometimes you get behind on the bigger pieces. But
yeah. You want to tell folks quickly about Apple Pay?
Oh yeah. Stripe has pretty good support for Apple Pay. So when you sign up or even change your payment method within Transistor, you'll eventually have the option to just use Apple Pay and it'll autofill everything.
Sweet.
And then that'll be your payment. Your subscription payment is Apple Pay.
Nice.
It just basically ties to it, ties to your credit card, but it makes signing up pretty simple. Basically like one touch.
Yeah. So in the future, we'll be able to tell folks, hey, if you're listening right now, just go to transistor.fm on your phone, sign up right now.
Or your MacBook Pro if you have the thumb reader.
Yeah, all you need is your thumb, and you could be podcasting right away.
Yeah, that's it.
All right, folks, I got to go. My battery's down to 5%, and I don't want to lose this recording. So we will see you next Tuesday. As always, reach out on at Transistor FM on Twitter, or at John Buda, at MI Justin, the letter M, the letter I Justin, and we will see you next week.
See you next week.